During this lesson, we will be asking ourselves the question, how do scientists identify independent and dependent variables? A rule to follow is that a scientist can change one factor and measure and observe what happens to the other factor. So for the remainder of this lesson, we will only see a change in one factor in looking at experiments. At this time, I would like you to write down in your EQ journal, or you may type it on your computer, that two main factors include a control and variables. So I'd like you to set up your tree to look like this because you'll be using it again in the remaining presentation. So pause your video now. First, the control. This is when scientists must keep parts of the experiment unchanged or the same, so then we can see what the outcomes or effects are of the variables that we do change. So a way to keep this in your mind is that the control is what is kept constant. So I have here that the control, which starts with a C, is kept constant. So CC, that'll be your little reminder that the control is kept constant throughout the entire experiment. So our takeaway is that the control is used as a comparison. That's why it needs to be kept the same. And this is not being tested. So in our experiment, we're looking for some things that are not being tested but left the same. This is where you're going to add on to your diagram or your tree. So off of variable, you are going to include the words independent or dependent. So we're looking at how a variable is a factor that can change the outcome. We're going to look at the relationship between independent and dependent. So please pause your video and complete your tree. Your tree should look something like the screen. If it is not, please fix it. So the independent variable is what is being changed. So the change that's occurring is the cause in our experiment. That means the dependent variable is the effect or the outcome. So it is what is being measured or observed at the end of the experiment. This happens because we are looking at how the independent variable affects the dependent variable. So they are the dependent variable is a responding variable, whereas the independent is the manipulated variable. So we are changing the independent and we're looking at how it affects the dependent. So let's take a look at an example. So the example is, how does the mass on a sled affect the speed of a sled as it goes down a hill? We are looking at what we can change. So in this case, the independent variable is the mass on a sled, because the scientists can alter the masses on a sled by adding more people on the sled or adding more weight on the sled. Then we're looking at what is the responding variable, or what the outcome is, which we can measure, which is the speed of a sled. So we can observe this and measure it with a timer. So the speed of the sled is the dependent variable. The control in this situation would include the rest of the factors that need to be kept the same in order for this experiment to run smoothly. So that would include the location of the sled on the hill, the distance that the sleds are traveling, the type of sled, and other factors unnamed. So I want you to take a look at the last question here. How does the amount of water a plant receives affect its growth? You're going to take a look at this question and try to decide what the independent variable is, the dependent variable, and the control. So please look back over your factor or after your tree to decide what those three factors are. You may pause your video at this time. The next is looking at independent variables of the plant receiving water. So the independent variable is the amount of water, because we can change the amount of water that a plant receives. So we can add 3 cups a day, or we can water it once a day. That is what we are changing, the independent variable. Now, the thing that we're measuring based on this question is the growth of a plant. So we can measure how fast it is growing or the height it grows. So we would have to be a little more specific about what type of growth here, but we can measure that. Things that we need to keep the same, or we keep it constant, is the control. So that would be the soil. So we have to have the same soil, the same amount of light getting to the plants, and the type of plant needs to be the same. We can't measure a sunflower to a tulip. So after you have finished this video, you may complete the assessment on independent and dependent variables.